Hello students, Standard 8, the revision of chapter number 12 we are going to start today. That is the friction. In the 11th chapter we saw that friction is a force which is a contact force. Now we will talk about friction. For this we will discuss about some situation that we see every day. For example, when the truck or a car driver slowing down the vehicle at the traffic signal. How? Similarly, if you are riding the bicycle, if we want to slow it down, we apply the brakes. The car driver or a truck driver also apply brakes to slow down the vehicle. So now, what happens when we apply the brakes? Why the vehicles are stopped when we apply the brakes? Because the friction force is acting on it. Similarly, not that only the vehicles, but if you see a ball is rolling on the floor, it also slows down when no other external forces are also applied, but it also slows down, and finally it stops also. It means that the ground is stopping by applying some force. Also, when you step on a banana peel, then what happens? You slip. Why? So, the answer of all this question we have to get from this chapter. Now, the force of friction is the force which is in the opposite direction of the motion of the object, and it always opposes the motion. Now, how does this force of friction produced? Means, what is the cause of the force of friction? That also we have to learn about that. So, as I told you, when the generally force of friction applied on the moving objects, and always it is in the opposite direction of the motion. Means, if the object is moving in the left direction, the force of friction will be in the opposite direction, and so on. And therefore it always opposes the motion, and therefore the speed is becoming the less. And therefore the rolling ball on the floor is also slows down. Applying the brakes, the vehicles slow down, and then finally they stop. So, what are the causes of the friction? And friction depends on some factors that are the shape of the surface and the nature of the surface. Nature of the surface is also very, very important, which the force of friction depends on it. For that, we can see that we have to use a spring balance. What is a spring balance? Spring balance, maybe you have seen like that. that is used by those people who are taking your old newspapers and the metal things, etc. So spring balance is a device that used for measuring the force acting on an object. It consists of a coil spring which gets stretched when the force is applied to it. Then stretching of the spring is measured by the pointer on the scale. So on the down and we have some object, then the spring is getting stretched and the pointer on the scale will go down, which will give you the magnitude of the force. So now if you want to drag the brick on different surfaces, then the force needed will be different. For that, you can do by wrap it in the polythene, you can wrap it with the jute and so on. So you will see that the jute is the rough material while the polythene is little smooth material. So what do you think? Which one is easier to drag? The brick which is wrapped in the jute, or the brick which is wrapped with polythene? Obviously, the brick which is wrapped with polythene will be easier to drag with the spring balance, because the smooth surfaces is exerting less force of friction, while the rough surfaces cause more force of friction. So the nature of the surface is the most important factor. So the smooth surfaces exert or apply the less force of friction, and the rough surfaces applying or the exerting the more force of friction. So polythene and jute, as we saw that they are rough, one of them is rough, the other one is the smooth. So roughness or smoothness is the important factor which causes the more or less force of friction. Similarly, you can do the another one also, like you make an inclined plane and make it on a smooth floor on a table, and then put a mark with a pen at any point, and then let the pencil shell move down from this point and check how far on the floor is it going. And when it is come to the rest, measure the distance. Now spread a piece of cloth on the floor, and again allow the shell to come down towards that inclined plane, and again measure the distance covered by the shell on the floor when it stops. Similarly, you can use the sand on the floor, and then again do the same activity and check how much distance is covered by the shell, and then it stops. You will see that when it is directly moving on the smooth floor, it will cover more distance. When you put the cloth is little rough material than the floor. Sand is also rough material than the floor. And therefore in these situations, more force of friction produced and therefore they cover less distance because they are slowing down very quickly, because more force of friction, then suddenly it will start slowing down and then it will stop. Now, what is the cause of force of friction? What happens between the surfaces? What is the interaction between them such that the force of friction is produced? That is the small irregularities on the surface. If you move your hand nicely on each type of surface, then you will find some ups and downs on each type of material. You can put your hand in the wooden material, cloth, the layer with the sand on it, on your floor, etc. So, what happens? There are some irregularities. Now, when one of the object moves on the surface of the other, what happens? The ups and downs of the irregularities, they interlock each other. They interlock each other, and therefore that motion is opposed. So that is known as force of friction. So that irregularities means ups and downs like mountains and valleys. In rough material there are so many this type of ups and downs, and therefore they can interlock each other very quickly, and therefore it is not easy to keep that speed, and therefore it slows down very quickly. But comparatively smooth surface, we think that it is the smoothest, but on the smooth surface like marble also, it is not completely smooth. There are small ups, up and downs will be found on those materials also. It means that they have a smaller type of that ups and downs, and therefore they cause less friction because they interlock, but it is not so much tightly interlocked, and therefore it can cover more distance and then it slows down. So the irregular surfaces or the rough surfaces, they apply the more force of friction, while the other one will apply, like the smooth material will apply very less force of friction. So when you want to move the heavy box that is lying on the floor, if it is very heavy, then it is difficult to move. Why? There is a force of friction between the floor and the bottom of that box. And then if you want to move it, then you have to apply force which is more than the force of friction. Means you have to overcome the friction, and then only you will be able to move that box. But if you apply a little force which is less than the force of friction, then it will be difficult for you. You won't be able to move that box at all. So to overcome the friction, we have to apply more force which is in the opposite direction, and it is more than the force of friction. Then and then only you will be able to move that table. So now, as I told you what type of irregularities are there. You can see here in this that there are irregularities here, and that irregularity between two surfaces will interlock each other, and therefore it is difficult to move. So that is the cause of the friction. And as I told you that smooth surfaces have small irregularities, while the rough surfaces have more of that one. Now the another question is that why is it easy to drag a mat from the floor, but it is difficult to drag the mat when somebody is sitting on it? So now the mat is on the floor. Now nobody is sitting on the floor, then it is not much attached, not tightly attached with the floor, and therefore it is easier to drag that. But now when somebody is sitting on it, then what happens? Due to the mass of that person, the two surfaces are very close to each other, and therefore the irregularities come closer to each other, so they can interlock them very tightly, and therefore it is not easier to drag that mat when somebody is sitting on it. So that is the thing that we learned today about the force of friction. About that we will learn more in next session. That force is required also, means it is friend also and it is enemy also. In some situation, some work is possible only because of the force of friction, and some damages are also such that they are because of the force of friction, that we will learn in the next session. So here we discuss about all these 5 questions. As an assignment you have to write down in your notebook, and any confusion write down in the comment section. Thank you very much.